first thing we're going to do is watch a quick video. Get to where you can see a screen. You're not going to want to miss this. I know some of you are going, okay, that was pretty cool. What was that? And we're going to get into what that is. Moonshots Capital invests in extraordinary leadership, and I want to talk first about this extraordinary leader before we get into exactly what Red 6 is. So Dan is a Royal Air Force fighter pilot. He is a Top Gun graduate, and he was the first non-American to fly and train as an instructor, the F-22. And as Craig alluded to and Melissa said, 6'2", got a nice cleft in his chin. He's got a British accent. His call sign, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't select your own call sign. His call sign is, of course, Bond. So I tried not to get into the photo frame with him this often. But we had a anniversary last week. 4 years we've been invested into Red 6 and into Dan. And we met Dan through Craig's military network. A gentleman at AFWorks named Dave Harden kind of clued us in that there was this brilliant leader with a really neat technology vision that we should look at. And the call came in, I talked to Dan, and he happened to be about 2 minutes from where we lived in Santa Monica. And I think we can get into exactly what I saw when I came over later. But we got to know Dan, and we started to get to understanding what makes him tick and what he's working on and what he's doing. And a big component of our decision-making is the origin story. It's what we call it. It's where the person comes from, what's driving them, and what kind of initiated the desire to execute on this vision. So Dan, if you could talk a little bit about the origin of Red 6 and how that came to be, I think that's going to help people understand a little more about who you are.
I definitely will. Well, thank you everyone. It's obviously a hard act to follow, but really appreciate it. And Kelly and Craig, I have to say massive thank you to you guys. You've been amazing for the last 4 years now, it is. So it's gone by the blink of an eye. So guys, I was a fighter pilot in the UK, and it sounds awesome, but the reality of it is I was born in a coal mine in the northeast of England, which seemed a long, long way away from the front line of a fast jet cockpit. Whenever anyone asks me where I'm from, and I want to sound sophisticated, I say I'm from just north of London. But the reality is I'm from like 400 miles north of London in a coal mine. So that's where I came from. I was lucky enough to get into the Royal Air Force, fly airplanes. As Kelly said, I went to fighter weapons school, which you'll know as Top Gun, and then obviously I get to fly the F-22 Raptor in the very early days of that airplane. So you have to understand that airplane wasn't even operational at the time. This is Lieutenant Petey, by the way. Sorry. Let's get over there. So the airplane wasn't even operational at the time. So when I came to that airplane, I had access to like the most classified airplane in the United States. It was just an extraordinary privilege. And every time I went up to fly and train, obviously in simple terms, we need to go fly and train against someone. And that's like a multi-billion-dollar a year problem. And the reality of it is that we couldn't get any training at all. It was really, really difficult because every time you fly an F-22, you're spending $100,000 a flight hour, right? And there's only so many of those airplanes around. There's not many of us, hard to find us, flight keepers or trainers. We're hemorrhaging. The Air Force are desperately short. Read, the training system in the United States Air Force and all allied nations around the world is broken. And this was back in the 2006 to 2009 timeframe. And I don't use that term slightly or easily. It is broken. It is an existential crisis that I wanted to set out to fix, right? So I looked at how we traditionally train fighter pilots, and we have live fly on one side and we have simulation on the other. We can't do live fly. We don't have enough dollars, pilots, airplanes, and simulation in no way, shape, or form can emulate the cognitive loads of sitting in a high-performance airplane, which will kill you in the blink of an eye. So how to do it differently. I also looked at the emerging threat, and it's funny, we're chatting about TikTok here earlier on, and it's a really interesting conversation because we've pivoted away in the United States and allied nations around from fighting this global war on terror to facing, for the first time, a peer adversary. And be under no illusions, the threat that is out there is China, right? And China, in China, you see a long-term geopolitical strategy, a systematic mobilization of a defense industrial base, and innovation now to the point where it is equaling us in some states. In some aspects, it's ahead of us. In some aspects, a little behind. But the bottom line is now, if we are to face a peer adversary, we're going to have to fight to win that conflict. It's no more rolling into a theater of operations and getting control of the skies we've historically done. And we were never going to be able to train to that peer adversary threat. So I wanted to solve it. So I actually leave the Air Force. I fall in love with the United States in 2009. I stay here, really, really pissed the Royal Air Force off. Don't go back to the UK, but I fall in love with everything it is that I think it is to be an American. And I went to grad school here. I worked in finance for a year or so, but I was still tugged to solve this problem. And life, as you talk about, the curveballs you get on a Monday morning that blindside you. I'm sitting in New York. I'm working in finance. I've flown Raptors. I'm having a good life, right? New York City is really good to me. And I get a call from my dad back in the UK, and this coal mine that I came from, my dad had started a company that had grown to have over 200 employees. It was a big employer in the town. And he called me. He said, "Look, son, we're going bankrupt here. I need you to come back. Can you come help me?" And when I say just north of London, like I can't. If anyone's seen Billy Elliot, I'm literally from that town, Billy Elliot, right? That town. That's where I'm from. So he's like, "Hey, son, will you come back here and help me out?" And I said, "Yes, Pop. I'll be on my way the next day." So off I went back to the UK. And as I was on my way back to the UK, sadly for me, my father elected to take his own life. And as I walk into a business now to talk about leadership challenges and adversity and resilience, I walk into a company that is broken from top to bottom on a Wednesday morning. I've just lost my dad. The company's bankrupt. I have a mom and 3 sisters. I've just left New York. I left a girlfriend I loved, all this kind of stuff. And I'm presented with the greatest leadership challenge of my life. And to talk about leadership in those terms, to inspire people to follow you on a journey that is incredibly challenging, is one of the most formative experiences of my life, and really an instrumental part in what shaped me into what I think it is to be a leader today, and set me up for Red 6. So I spent 5 or 6 years leading a very, very difficult turnaround of that business, but ultimately to success, and I exited the company in 2018. And I put my mom on eHarmony. She found a new husband, and apparently it's easy for her to date. Not so much for me, but she did it. She's married. It's great. So if anyone needs tips, give me a call. I'll connect you to my mom. And so I moved back to the States. I was like, okay, like what do I want to do next for the rest of my life? And losing my dad in the way I did, and the 5 years of hell that I went through in the UK, I gave myself 2 promises. One was I'd only work on things that I'm really, really passionate about, that I think are important to humanity. And the second one was I'd only work with people that I absolutely love and whose value systems I think are aligned to my own. And so as I go back to the problem of, I kept coming back to my love affair with aviation and flying training and national security, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go tackle this problem. I'm going to go solve training for the United States Air Force and the broader allies around the world. And so what I invented with my co-founder at Red 6, what you just saw up there on the screen, was a blend of simulation and live fly. And what we've actually done is created the world's first outdoor multiplayer video game that we play up in the sky. So what you're seeing there in real footage is real pilots and real airplanes looking out of the window wearing an optical augmented reality system, dogfighting against augmented reality entities that don't exist, that are driven by AI algorithms that are thinking and flying and fighting for themselves and trying to shoot back. And the really exciting thing about that is if we have an intelligence based on a threat now, we can train against whatever we want to train against at whatever scale we want to train against. When Kelly and Craig met me, I had an aeroplane with one wing, a propeller on the back that was a pretend propeller.
I saw you put it on as I walked in.
And a PowerPoint deck that, and I said to Kelly and Craig, this is my vision. Will you back it? And like any good VC, they looked at me and went, absolutely not. And they said no, and they walked away. And a few months later, they called me back up, and I was sitting under a towel on the beach, and we began a real conversation, and that's where we started, huh?
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that, Dan. I think you can all see the inability to stop. He won't stop, and he'll take on any challenge. The grit that Coach Sark talked about earlier, obviously here in spades. And as we got to know Dan more and understood what his vision was, understood more about his co-founders and the technology, and through our relationships on the DoD side, understood what the need was, we got more and more comfortable, and we ended up investing $1 million and led their seed round from Fund 1, and we participated in every round of financing since then. And one of them recently closed, $57 million Series B. He got another 10, he told me, upstairs, but until the docs are signed, it's $57 million. It's $57 million as of right now, with 10 on the way. And when we met him, there was that hangar that you were renting space in that had the skeleton of the Berkut aircraft, and then there was a loft studio suite in Venice that you had to enter from an alley. And if any of you have been in Venice, you know what that's like. Craig and I walked upstairs and walked in. His co-founder was upstairs asleep on the little couch, and it looked like they had, maybe it was a 1970s fighter pilot helmet with 100-mile-an-hour tape stuck to it. It was literally a MacGyver workshop. And we said, we need to see a little bit more. So we need to see a little bit more. That went on for probably 4 months, and we ended up investing. So between what that was then, Dan, can you describe the evolution of building Red 6 to the 100-plus person company, 3 different geographic location business that, we just had a board meeting in a brand new office in Orlando this week?
Yeah, look, it's a hell of a journey. Kelly and Craig, to be quite clear, were absolutely right to say no when they came to see us for the first time. And because I was literally pushing an airplane around that had no engine on the back. And I was like, guys, imagine this in the air with this kick-ass augmented reality system that's impossible. So saying no was a good decision. But look, we had a thesis that we felt was majorly disruptive, right? If we could pull this off, it would absolutely transform how we think about warfighting, how we think about training ad infinitum. The trouble was, as these guys pointed out quite rightly, we basically had 5 startups in one because we were solving a massive amount of problems. Namely, at the time, that augmented reality as an industry, it didn't work outdoors or in dynamic environments. So you could put an augmented reality headset on, and I could put a purple dinosaur on your desk, and you could see it indoors. But the moment you step outdoors, that solution didn't work, right? And there's some very real laws of physics that we're trying to overcome there with light and brightness and all sorts of stuff. And so no one believed us at the time that we could do this. But my co-founder, Glenn Snyder, had pulled off something a few years earlier, which people weren't really paying attention to, but I paid really careful attention to, in that he was the first person in the world. He took 2 race cars, put them on 2 separate racetracks at the same time, put a real race car driver in each of them, and even though they're in different locations, created a virtual reality system, and the drivers were able to meet each other in a virtual world and race real race cars blind to the outside world. And when I saw that, I was able to connect the dots and realize that he actually had the genesis of something really, really special that he wasn't thinking about. And so I asked him 2 questions. Can we, A, do that in airplanes? He said, probably. I'm like, we'd need an airplane. I was like, I'm building one. We need someone stupid enough to test fly it. I'm like, that's me. And so he said, yeah, we could probably do that. And the second question was, I can't do that in virtual reality. I literally can't allow fighter pilots to fly around blind to the outside world. So can we do that in augmented reality? And he looked at me as if I was crazy and said, no, we can't, because augmented reality doesn't work outdoors or in dynamic environments. And so I literally said to him, well, we better figure it out, because I've just promised the Air Force we can do it, and we've got a demo in like 10 months. And so that forcing function of making us go to work was very real and powerful. And fast forward to today, the kind of glimpse of what you guys saw on the screen now is, I'll describe it to you. I can take off in an airplane with a wingman. I can go up into the sky. I enter this augmented reality world, which we're calling the metaverse, right? We were using it before it was cool and then became uncool, and I think it's going to be cool again. But in essence, we've built the metaverse up in the sky. And so we enter this digital training environment whilst we're physically flying real airplanes, and we're training against the latest Chinese airplanes out there with surface-to-air missiles coming up at us, simulating air-to-air refueling. So the technology stack has evolved to the point now where we're working directly with the Air Force, we're engaged with Boeing, with Lockheed Martin, with BAE Systems, with Leonardo. All of these companies now are recognizing that what we are building is inevitable. And so I envision a future now for not just fighter pilots flying around. I envision a future where all warfighters across all domains, the way we train is in a synthetic world outdoors. Well, what is that? I think fundamentally it's the future of video gaming. When I grew up in the northeast of England, I was running around in the woods with a stick, playing in the mud. And kids today, right, the sedentary indoors playing video games. I think the next great leap that we make is blending the physical world with the synthetic world. And so as I tackle this for the DoD head on and we usher in something really special, the North Star for the company is looking at what the future of gaming and interaction with our digital information means. And I firmly believe that that is anchored in the metaverse, but it's 10 years away for a consumer. And the core enabling technology for that, be under no illusions, is not virtual reality. It's augmented reality and artificial intelligence. Augmented future. And the reason that is because it has to be ubiquitous, which means it has to go with us wherever we are, which means it has to be mobile in nature, which means it has to work outdoors on the move. And what we've built at Red 6 is really the genesis of that.
I hope everyone followed that. So one of the things that Craig and I have evolved as investors, there are two factors for criteria for investing in a company that are not listed on the website. One factor is the fuck yeah factor. Craig and I have to come away from the meeting with the founder and then thinking about the business is, we got to do this. It's like you're washing your hair in the shower and you're thinking, okay, how do I help Red 6 today? It's got to. Sorry, some of us are washing our hair. The other factor is it has to be meaningful, right? It has to have a significant impact on the world, and we feel strongly that companies, obviously for what Dan is doing with Red 6 fits into that category. So let's look back at the last 4 years. 1, 2, or 3 financial crises, depending on how you look at it. A pandemic in which you almost died. And how that impacted the rest of the company. Your bank went out of business. And probably one of the easiest things you've had to deal with is selling into the government. So what do you consider from a kind of leadership challenge and or attacking standpoint, what has been the most difficult obstacle in building the company to where it is today?
Look, I think the conversation that we had previous to this kind of captured what it is. And I think the single biggest thing that I place emphasis on is, look, there's tons of smart people out there, right? And you see them every day, and they're all way smarter than I am. And I try to surround myself with the very best people I can find. But the one thing I pay very, very careful attention to is, we talked about it as culture, but I look at the value system of the human being very, very carefully. And I think, I always think that talented people are really important, obviously, to get hold of. But talented people with the wrong values are really, really dangerous people. And they're people that will kill a business in a heartbeat. And as you know, I've had to go through a number of dismissals, firings, separations, whatever you want to call it, because I ruthlessly adhere to protecting a culture that I think is so important and transcends just me as a leader, but it permeates throughout the rest of the business. And when we were asking what culture was earlier on, I have a very specific thought on culture, and I think culture are the decisions that are made and the ethics in which they're made when no one is looking, right? I think the absence of leadership, the guidebook I give my team is, look, I'm going to try and empower you massively to make really good decisions. I believe in the military we call it mission command, right? So what I do is I'm like, if it's massively bad, let me know about it. If it's really good, let me know about it. In the middle, I empower you to make good decisions, provided you stick to the value system of the organization. And if you make decisions and they're wrong, but you've adhered to the value system, system of the business, I will back them every single time, because you have to allow human beings to make mistakes. If they transgress the value system of the organization and they make mistakes, then I'm pretty ruthless, and I'm pretty quick in adhering to that. And that principle or that playbook has allowed me to build a company that I think the culture, I mean, I speak for myself, you see it, but I think we have a pretty exceptional culture that I would actually describe it as exquisite. And I know that if I'm not in there on a day-to-day basis, I know how these guys and girls are thinking about making these decisions. And that's allowed us to navigate through a massive amount of adversity. I think the other lessons we've learned is we've gone through systematic challenges, and you named some of them. And I quite literally died and wasn't in the company for a while, and having contracted a particularly bad form of COVID. I was pretty confident that the company would continue without me, because I weeded out the people very, very quickly that I didn't think fit the value system of the organization. And I always believe is, you know, as you look at people, I pay less and less attention to what people say, and I pay very, very careful attention to what people do. And I think actions always tell you the truth, right? If you want to know what someone's about, just look at what they do. And so as we've gone through this 4 years, a company is like a living, breathing organism, right? It's like a tree, it's like a plant, and you have to groom it, and you have to make way for more light and all that kind of stuff. And you always know what the right decision is. And I think the mistakes the leaders make is just not actioning the right decisions in time. And so I try to sit silently with myself. I try to be really quiet and mindful. And if I know what the right decision is, then I tend to be pretty aggressive in making it. And then other than that, I get out of the way of these people, and they execute. I just tell the story and, you know, cruise around the country doing what I do. But the reality of it is I've got an amazing team that are amazingly talented, but they're beautiful human beings with amazing values. I think that's the secret.
I'll corroborate that. One of the biggest risks that we had for Red 6 was, you know, the best thing about the company was Dan Robinson was leading it with his leadership traits, and the worst thing about it was Dan Robinson was the pilot. So he was actually flying like every day in a experimental aircraft with experimental headset. And the reason they use the aircraft that they use is because it can pull the same G's as a fighter pilot. So, okay, I hope Dan lands safely today. He's also fundraising. He's also recruiting. And so what he's done so well is really find talented people, recruit them, and then delegate. And that's something that all you founders that are here have to think about. How do you do it? When do you do it? How do you trust? And I think Dan just described a great framework for thinking about how you can do that in a great way. Another thing that you did that I was questioning, if you'll remember, is, you know, after about 24 months, there was like a 17-person board with generals and admirals that had to explain what a 409A was. You people might not know what that is, but like they had no idea about early stage startups. And I'm like, I think this may be a little overkill, Dan. We like to keep boards small so we're nimble and can move quickly for a long period of time. And I would like for you to explain why we love founders that are coachable and that listen to us but still make their own decisions. I probably more frequently say, I told you so. Craig's nicer than that if it's wrong. But this was something that you went with because you felt it was the right thing to do for the business. Can you talk a little bit about the board, how and why you organized it the way you did, and what your strategy was for it? Because I know a lot of founders struggle with that.
Yeah, so hands up, who are founders in here? Just so I can get a sense. Okay, so you know the ass pain of dealing with boards, right? All too well. So look, I would say we were very, I'm not just saying this, but we were very, very lucky to get Kelly and Craig and have Kelly on the board in the early days. And he's been really, really light touch with me. And that's been really important because he's trusted me. And whenever he's presented an opinion, I've listened. And if I think he's wrong, I'll tell him he's wrong. And he's really good about that, right? So what you have to understand with my business is we're doing something absolutely unique in that we are trying to usher in a technology into a customer that no one believes in the technology, right? Into a customer that doesn't want to accept new technology, is really difficult to innovate, very, very difficult to penetrate. I mean, the bureaucracy is, like, the government will do their level best to kill you without even thinking about it, right? I know you've been through this, right? It's a day-to-day fight. So you have to think about, like, okay, how can I maximally influence the company, the customer that we're dealing with? But also for me, I wanted as diametrically opposed viewpoints on the board as absolutely possible. I think, you know, one of the mantras of, you see the movie Top Gun and you think it's a bunch of egomaniacs running around like being their own chest, trying to be the best fighter pilots in the world. And actually it's the antithesis of that. And when you go to what we'd refer to as the fighter weapons school, they actually preach three real qualities. And that is humble, approachable, and credible. And I think humility is incredibly empowering, particularly as a founder. And so I want to be held to account. I want to know what I'm screwing up. And I want as many different viewpoints around me as I possibly can. And with the best will in the world to Kelly, even though he's a West Point graduate. All right? So
did you hear what he did as a child? He ran around with a stick playing Army in the woods. No kids run around playing Navy.
Yeah, that would be weird. So even though he's a West Point grad, and I use crayons and pictures when I'm explaining things to him, he doesn't know the first thing about fighter combat, right? So we needed that expertise and influence on the board. So what I argued to Kelly was, look, I want to bring a 4-star general onto the board much earlier than you might imagine. And we were very, very lucky to get a General Mike Holmes, some of you may know him, the former commander of Air Combat Command, agreed to join the board, initially as an advisor, then a board member. And the aim for me was to always transition him to a chairman role. And the reason I wanted to put him in a chairman role is I have a certain amount of experience flying airplanes, but this gentleman is a legend, right, that has gone all the way through a career, made it to a 4-star general, and I want to be held to account. I'm not afraid of that, and I'm also not afraid to tell the general he's wrong as well. I don't agree with him. But it's really important that I get that diametrically opposed view. So as I built the board out, I was catering to the fact that we're dealing with a unique customer that we're seeking to influence, and having the credibility of a 4-star general on the board obviously made tremendous sense. And then for the Navy guys in the audience, I don't want to leave you out, we also put a 4-star admiral on the board as well. So yeah. So we get to talk boats and submarines and stuff. It's cool. So we have this beautiful blend now of Kelly, founder-friendly, entrepreneurial. We have finance folks, and we have a couple of 4-stars on the board. And I would actually say that we have an extremely high-functioning board that challenges each other and gives massively conflicting or opposing viewpoints. But ultimately, it helps me get to the best decision I think that's the right one for the business. And as founders, you obviously you take a ton of pressure from the board, and it's obviously important to push back and tell them when you think they're full of it as well, because no one knows your business as well as you do. So that's how I thought about building the board.
Awesome. Let's open up for some questions from everybody. If anybody in the other 2 rooms wants to ask a question, please walk up here. Yes, sir.
Okay, so for the guys in the other room, I had 2 Top Gun questions. One is, would an F-22 be able to do that mission way easier than the F-18, and why did they use the F-18? And the second one was, could an F-18 survive in basically a dogfight against the next generation threat like a Chinese J-20 or Russian Su-57, right? So the answer to the first part of the question is, the movie was bullshit. There's no way. So there is no way in this world you would put an F-18 up against airplanes like that. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff wrong, right, with the plot line. Like, for example, if they know where the surface-to-air missiles are and they're launching Tomahawk cruise missiles, why don't they just track the surface-to-air missiles? Then they just fly in, no problem, right? That's one of them. But the real reason they use the F-18 and not the F-35 is actually a production issue, because Tom Cruise insisted on flying the airplane. And the reality with the F-35 or the F-22 is there's no two-seat airplanes. So they're obviously not going to let him fly it. So they chose the F-18. They put him in the back but it was as if he was flying it. And then they had to write the script entirely around that, make it up, because Tom Cruise wanted to fly in the airplanes. That's the first one. Second question was, how realistic is the F-18 going up against, it is just so, it is nonsense, absolutely nonsense. And I don't know if there are any F-18 guys in the audience. If there are, I apologize. But when I flew the F-22, it was kind of like clubbing baby seals, right? So it was, sorry, Navy, but that's just the truth. Now, the F-22 is just a phenomenally capable airplane, and you could put a shaved chimpanzee in that cockpit, and they do really well. So, yeah, it's an amazing airplane.
Yes, sir.
The first one was we have an existential training crisis in this country. Are potential adversaries aware of this, and do they suffer the same problems, namely Russia and China? That's the first one. The second one is, why the hell is a little startup called Red 6 tackling this problem head on and no one else is? And the third one is, anyone else out there doing it? Is that basically what I'm talking about? Okay, so to answer the first question, the severity of the training crisis that we experience right now, I believe, is absolutely existential, right? And I'll break it down into three key problems that we have, and I'm talking about in the fighter fleet, right? I break it down into production, absorption, and what I call readiness. And production is we are physically not producing enough fighter pilots to fulfill the demand gap, because it's pretty hard to find us, it's hard to train us, and it's hard to keep us, right? The guys and girls are burned out working 14 hours a day and being away all the time. The ops tempo over the last 30 years has been really high. So that's the production thing. Even when we produce pilots, the ability to absorb them onto the front line and get them up to speed, we're really lacking there. Why are we lacking there? Because since Gulf War 1 down to today, we've gone from 134 combat squadrons to plus or minus 57 active frontline combat squadrons right now. And the average age of an airplane in Gulf War 1 was 9 years old. The average age of an airplane right now is 29 years old, right? So that's that. So, and the final piece of that is readiness, to be ready and lethal, having experienced these pilots. To do that, we need to be able to train to relevancy. So we can't train at scale. We can't produce pilots enough. We can't train at scale. But even if we could, I'm deadly serious when I say, when you look, like Russia is a bit of a distraction. I'll get to Russia in a second, but China is the threat. And in China, you've seen a long-term geopolitical strategy aligned to a systematic mobilization of a defense industrial base. And central to that mobilization is the pace of innovation and a focus on innovation. And innovation happens through a number of ways, through nefarious means, through espionage, IP theft, education of their workforce in this country, and to indigenous production and export of technology, obviously, around the world. So all of these read that the rate of change in China is so astronomically fast right now that, as I opened up with, in many ways they're on par with us. In some instances they're ahead of us. In some instances they're a little way behind. But it's more and more complex, because as you think about where would we potentially go fight, we are trying to project air power a long, long, long way away from home, into the South China Seas, into the Straits of Taiwan, wherever it may be. And that's very serious, because you talk about China having asymmetric advantage of home court advantage, overwhelming numbers, technology that's on par with us, and a mobile air defense system, where we are reliant on really static things like ports, infrastructure, runways, and aircraft carriers we can't put inside 1,000 miles of China because they can reach out and touch us now. So it's a very, very, very difficult, complex problem for us to solve. That's the first thing. Secondly, the second part of your question, are they aware of the crisis we have? Absolutely, 100%. I can tell you I get inundated, we talk about it in the board, with Chinese friend requests on LinkedIn all day long, every day. I'm very popular with China and Russia right now, right? So much so that I arrived in Singapore last year, and this is kind of scary. As I walked into a hotel, I was met at the bar by someone, and they said, "Mr. Robinson, we're so happy you're here. Very well aware of who you are. Enjoy your visit to Singapore. We'll be tracking your every move," basically, right? So it's kind of scary stuff. That's a real thing. So they're absolutely aware. Now, do they have the same problems themselves?
they have different problems. Russia, I think the crisis in Ukraine as a pure adversary has realized or revealed the reality of the rhetoric coming out of Russia versus the actual core competency to be able to mobilize and fight a high-intensity war. And so Russia, I think, is largely, it's like the economy's small, it's not that relevant. Of course, there's a nuclear threat, but I think what's really important is to see the Europeans step up and really led by the UK is a really good thing to see, because yes, the US are obviously involved, but it's really important that the US stays focused on the prize, and the prize is dealing with China. So I'm really pleased to see the partners in Europe stepping up and dealing with that. In terms of their own problems within China, there are different problems they have. I mean, it's very difficult for us to assess the true competency. But I can tell you that they're not wasting time on some of the BS issues that we waste our time on over here that are not conducive to producing what it is we're there to do, which is design and produce the most lethal warfighting force on the face of the planet, right? They don't have to deal with all the nonsense we have to deal with. And I think at times I lament that we are misprioritizing what is important for a nation when it's producing warfighting capability. They don't deal with that. We do. That said, the United States has consistently proven it is a true superpower in the world. And I, as a Brit and now an American, I just want to make sure that we preserve that technological advantage. Because look, the surest way to preserve peace is to be so futile for any enemy to even think about challenging us. And so we absolutely have to be completely lethal. And to be lethal, we need to be credible. To be credible, we need to train. And it goes all the way back to where do we find produced pilots. And that's what we're trying to tackle at Red 6. So hopefully that's every part of your question, right?
Thank you. We're done? All right. There's one more. He's had his hand up the whole time. Last one. In the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you an AI guy? Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how are we leveraging some of the work coming out of DARPA, which is, there's a program called Alpha Dogfight Ace Combat, which basically looked at using autonomy and AI algorithms to fly against real pilots in real airplanes. So that's a multifaceted question, right? Because how are we leveraging it and how are we using it? We were actually the company that worked with one of the incumbents in that space to build the data sets, to validate that initial stuff. It was actually with EPISI that we worked very closely. So we were flying those algorithms against human beings 5 or 6 years ago as that thing came online and we're building it out. So those algorithms are technologies agnostic, and we can ingest, be it Shield AI, Huron, Sortec, EPISI, Lockheed, whatever it is. We're agnostic to whichever AI algorithm it is, and so we're leveraging it that way. The subtext perhaps of the question, and what I think is the more important thing, is the idea of are human beings even relevant anymore, and is AI? And I think that's probably politely what you're driving at, right? So I would say this: human beings are absolutely relevant, and they're going to be around flying fighters for a long, long time. What we are pivoting to is the combination of manned and unmanned working together. And I think that is an essential part of how we will fight wars of the future, but it does not solve the training problem. And it doesn't solve the training problem because you will not want to we have got the money to produce all of the unmanned assets that we want to fly around every single day of the week, so we can't scale them. We don't want to beat them up and waste them every day. So as I see and I look at the advent of unmanned aerial vehicles, massively important for warfighting, but what is an unmanned aerial vehicle? Really, it's the core of your question. At the heart of it is an AI algorithm. And it's got a kinetic capability, and it does non-kinetic and all that kind of stuff. I don't care. Really, it's an AI algorithm. And central to the concept of human beings and AI working together is building trust. And central to building trust is being able to do that in as a risk-free environment as possible. And what's a risk-free way of training to that AI algorithm? Using augmented reality. And so I think as we think about training to develop concepts of operations for manned and unmanned, you're going to see synthetic training being incredibly important to unmanned aerial vehicles, which I can see play a massive role in the future of warfighting. I don't think they play a big role in the future of training.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Dan.